Welcome to Midnight Rain Tales. The world sleeps, and the rain begins to whisper. In this quiet hour, stories drift through the night air, soft, chilling, unforgettable. Here, under the midnight sky, we share the tales the rain refuses to forget. Stay close and listen. The allure of the past, for me, isn't in yellowed documents or grand narratives. It resides in the tangible scars of time, the heft of objects worn smooth or chipped by vanished hands. I crave authenticity, the grain beneath the polish, the undeniable weight of history. It was this hunger that drew me, one unremarkable Saturday, to the echoing hall of an auction house, far from the predictable replicas cluttering weekend flea markets. Amidst the spectral ticking of a dust-shrouded grandfather clock and the forlorn gaze of cracked porcelain, my eyes snagged on it. Leaning against a shadowed wall, almost an afterthought, was the mirror. Its frame, the color of bruised plums, bore a finish dulled by generations of touch, etched along the edges with fissures like frozen lightning. The glass itself wasn't pristine. It held a certain weariness, heavy, undoubtedly. Carved into the wood were elaborate, almost obsessive flourishes, twisted vines perhaps, or grasping tendrils. It possessed no conventional beauty, yet it commanded my attention, a dark magnet. There, I thought, a flicker of possessiveness igniting. That one. A swift lift of my paddle, a negligible sum exchanged. No one else offered even a passing glance. It was mine. Its sheer mass proved formidable. Arranging transport required the grumbling assistance of auction staff, their hands straining as we loaded it onto my pickup. Back at my residence, an old house acquired some years prior, replete with drafts and settling groans, I knew instinctively where it belonged. Not the living room nor the bedroom, those spaces felt too inhabited. No, this piece demanded the umbrageous solitude of the attic, a sprawling space beneath the eaves where floorboards groaned like ancient bones and a lone fly-specked bulb cast jaundiced light. The thought of introducing its unsettling presence into my daily life provoked a distinct unease. Living alone meant the ascent was a solitary struggle. Via the narrow side stairs leading directly upwards, gloved hands gripping the frame, its texture strangely gritty, filmed with an unidentifiable residue. I wrestled the mirror into the attic's gloom. Finally positioned against a plaster wall, I stood, palms on hips, breath ragged. Flicking on that single overhead bulb, I watched the mirror absorb the weak illumination. It seemed even more ancient now, the silvering behind the glass, mottled with creeping black spots like a slow decay. Catching my reflection, I saw my own face obscured by these voids, fragmented. A peculiar sight, yet I dismissed it with a shrug and retreated downstairs. Days dissolved into the rhythm of work, the mirror relegated to the dusty recesses of my mind. Then came an evening errand, retrieving stored luggage. Climbing the attic stairs, I switched on the light and traversed the groaning floor. As I passed the mirror, a sound, a sibilance like dry leaves skittering across stone, brushed my ear. I froze. Drafts were common. The house breathed its own secrets. Perhaps rodents nested within the walls. But this felt deliberate, intimate. It ceased the instant I stilled. My gaze swept the room, lingered on the mirror's impassive surface. Nothing. I deposited the suitcases, cast one final searching look around, and turned towards the stairs. Just as my foot found the top step, it returned, a whisper, faint as exhaled breath, undeniably close. I spun back. Only my own reflection stared out from the dim glass, strangely distorted by the angle. My posture twisted, a knot tightened in my gut. My pulse hammered. Motionless, I strained to understand, but the silence held. I fled downstairs. Sleep offered little respite that night. The phantom whisper echoed, clinging to the edge of consciousness. Had it truly emanated from the mirror? Preposterous. Old wood contracts, houses settle. Yet, passing the attic door, my eyes invariably drifted upwards, anticipating that disquieting sound. My next ascent was prompted by forgotten photo albums tucked away in a box. The moment I pushed open the attic door, a palpable chill enveloped me. The air hung thick, stale, and the overhead bulb flickered erratically, grating on already frayed nerves. I navigated towards the far corner, the mirror lying directly in my path, and as I drew level with it, the whisper rose again. This time, unmistakably, it shaped itself around my name, Alara, not spoken but breathed, formed from the very air beside me. A difficult swallow, a hesitant glance at the glass. My reflection appeared ordinary, yet the fine hairs on my arms prickled upright. Ignore it. I seized the box of albums, hurrying back towards the stairs, the sensation of being watched prickling the nape of my neck. Closing the attic door felt like sealing a tomb. I leaned against the hallway wall, breath catching, heart thundering a frantic rhythm against my ribs, a faint dizziness swirling. "It's just an old mirror," I chanted internally, but the conviction felt hollow, fragile. The ensuing nights bled into restless dawns. Dreams plagued me, fragmented visions of reflections moving asynchronously, mocking my own gestures. I'd wake slick with sweat, the specifics dissolving but leaving behind a residue of profound unease, a sense of being fundamentally out of step. Come the weekend, resolve hardened, armed with a heavy-duty flashlight, a talisman against the gloom. Despite the functional bulb, I marched back up the stairs. Silence reigned in the attic. The mirror stood sentinel. Planting myself before it, I forced myself to look, truly look. My reflection stared back, eyes shadowed with fatigue, hair askew. It was undeniably me, yet an unnerving awareness bloomed. Something else observed me from within the glass depths. My pulse surged. My limbs felt leaden, rooted to the spot. I swayed slightly, testing. The reflection mirrored the movement flawlessly. No lag, no strangeness. Leaning closer, my face inches from the cool surface, I noted the faint scratches webbing the glass, the dull patina on the intricately carved frame. A tentative tap with my knuckles produced a flat, hollow sound. Then behind me, a distinct creak split the silence. I whirled around. Empty space. Gritting my teeth, I spun back to the mirror. For an infinitesimal second, a heartbeat less, I could have sworn the reflection turned a fraction slower than I had. The perception was so fleeting, so instantaneous, I doubted my own senses. My breath hitched. A bead of sweat traced a path down my temple. Retreating slowly, fighting the primal urge to bolt, I turned and descended the stairs with deliberate steps, my hand gripping the banister, knuckles white, trying to quell the violent tremor in my hands. Dismissal became impossible. Subsequent, unavoidable trips to the attic were invariably accompanied by those faint, sibilant whispers, sometimes a flicker of movement in the periphery of the mirrored glass, a shape, dark and indistinct, vanishing the moment I tried to focus. Not me. I'd be standing perfectly still. Each instant sent adrenaline jolting through me, hastening my retreat. The attic became forbidden territory, entered only out of absolute necessity. One night, returning late from visiting Anya, exhaustion weighing me down, a foolhardy impulse seized me. Perhaps a draft, a simple structural flaw could explain the noises. Clutching a small toolkit, propelled by a desperate need for rational explanation, or maybe just bravado, I ascended the stairs once more. Each tread seemed amplified, protesting my weight. The attic door groaned open into near darkness. The bulb remained stubbornly unlit. My flashlight beam sliced through the gloom, illuminating familiar shapes. Stacked boxes, shrouded furniture, the mirror, everything still. I methodically checked the walls near it, searching for cracks, for any source of the subtle airflow I felt against my cheek. A cold, faint current, yet its origin remained elusive. I muttered self-deprecatingly under my breath. Then I directed the flashlight beam squarely at the mirror. My reflection emerged, bleached by the intense light. Something was wrong with the silhouette of my head. It seemed misaligned. Lowering the beam, squinting into the semi-darkness, the horrifying truth dawned. My reflection wasn't perfectly congruent with my own body. I shifted sideways. The image in the glass lagged, trailing my movement by a palpable beat. My knees threatened to buckle. A band tightened around my chest, stealing my breath. A tremor started deep within me. Taking a hesitant step back, the reflection finally snapped into alignment, but the expression mirrored there. My own face felt alien, subtly altered. My mouth was sandpaper dry. Sweat beaded on my brow. Escape screamed through my mind, yet an opposing force held me captive, a morbid compulsion to watch. Turning my back felt like an invitation. My flashlight flickered, threatening darkness. A sharp rap against my palm restored the beam. In that brief, plunging blackness, the whisper came again, sharp and undeniable. An exhalation directly beside my ear. Panic erupted. I scrambled blindly towards the door. As my hand reached the knob, a distinct puff of frigid air touched the back of my neck, intimate as a breath. I slammed the attic door, the sound echoing, and stumbled down the stairs, not stopping until I reached the relative safety of the living room, bathing it in the glare of every available light. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic prisoner. That final whisper resonated, chillingly clear, shaping my name. Ilara. Curled on the sofa, wrapped in a paralysis of fear, I remained there for hours. Every creak of the old house, a fresh assault on my nerves. For days following, the attic ceased to exist in my mental landscape. Work, home, television's mindless flicker, sleep, or attempts at it, confined to my bedroom, often with the lamp burning through the night. The mirror haunted my dreams relentlessly. My reflection would gaze back, but its eyes held a disturbing otherness, ancient and aware. I'd wake gasping, drenched in sweat, the rational reassurances, just a dream, dissolving against the chillingly visceral memory. Last week, the inertia of fear finally yielded to the unbearable tension of living besieged in my own home. I resolved to act. A large, heavy dust sheet became my weapon. If I couldn't face it, perhaps I could obscure it, silence it beneath the fabric. Ignoring the tremor that started in my legs as I climbed, I marched resolutely upstairs. The attic air was thick, the lone bulb casting a feeble, sickly glow. Straight towards the mirror I went, steeling myself against the faint sibilance that seemed to greet my approach. With a decisive flourish, I flung the sheet over the glass, smoothing it down, tucking the edges securely around the carved frame. Standing back, breathing hard, I surveyed my handiwork. No reflection, just a shapeless shroud. A measure of relief washed over me. My heartbeat steadied. "Done," I muttered, the word tasting like victory. "That's it." I retreated downstairs. That night brought the first extended period of unbroken sleep in weeks. A single disturbance around 3 a.m. My name, muffled, distant, fading almost immediately, failed to fully rouse me. The following day dawned with a fragile sense of hope. I watched a film, my gaze remaining fixed on the screen, not darting towards shadows. Covering the mirror, I allowed myself to believe had been sufficient. Then, 2 nights ago, the illusion shattered. Around midnight, a resonant thump echoed from overhead. I bolted upright in bed, heart seizing. Silence. Then another thump, followed by a protracted scraping noise like something heavy being dragged across the wooden floor. Bile rose in my throat. I stood frozen in the hallway, listening intently. The sounds ceased, replaced by a silence pregnant with menace. Should I investigate? Grabbing the weighty flashlight, I crept towards the attic stairs, each breath shallow, hands unsteady. Easing the door open, I was met with darkness. The bulb was out again. My flashlight beam cut a swathe through the black. The dust sheet lay crumpled on the floorboards at the base of the mirror, and the mirror itself. It was canted forward, shifted perhaps a foot from the wall, as if deliberately moved. Dry-mouthed, I edged into the room, light sweeping nervously, empty. The air held a rank, cold smell. It couldn't have slid. The floor was uneven, the frame inert. It defied logic. Kneeling to retrieve the sheet, a whisper coiled around my ear, so close, so distinct. It tore a small cry from my lips. I scrambled backward, colliding with a stack of cardboard boxes, sending them tumbling with a clatter. Cursing, eyes locked on the mirror, I raised the flashlight beam. My reflection stared back, but it was wrong, horribly wrong. It blinked a fraction of a second after I did. Panic clawed at my chest, sharp and visceral. My gaze flickered towards the stairs. Escape, but tearing my eyes from the glass felt impossibly dangerous. I shuffled sideways, hugging the wall, keeping the mirror perpetually in view. With every slight shift of my weight, the reflection's delay grew, becoming more pronounced, more deliberate. By the time I reached the threshold, trembling violently, the flashlight nearly slipping from my grasp, the lag was undeniable, grotesque. I spun and fled, slamming the door, the echo chasing me down the stairs. I haven't been back up. Sleep comes in ragged snatches, punctuated by phantom noises. A persistent tightness constricts my chest whenever my thoughts drift upwards. The image of that uncovered mirror, standing sentinel in the dark, is intolerable. But it's the lag, the hideous delay in my own reflection, that truly haunts me. It felt sentient, as if something else wore my face, deciding at its own pace when to mimic my movements. I imagine it now, watching from the silver depths, waiting. Sometimes I hear it. Faint footfalls pacing the attic floor above. Last night, I'm almost certain, a low voice breathed my name. Ilara. What resides within that glass and why it fixates on me remains a terrifying enigma. Skepticism has dissolved, replaced by a primal fear. Curses, hauntings, concepts I once dismissed now feel chillingly plausible. I am trapped, paralyzed by dread. Smashing it feels dangerous, inviting unknown repercussions. Disposing of it requires another ascent into that shadowed space, a prospect I cannot currently face. I exist in a state of siege. The low murmur of the television a constant companion, a flimsy shield against the silence and the thoughts that fester within it. Each dawn feels like a reprieve, each dusk a prelude to renewed terror. I wait, hoping for courage, for resolution, while a chilling question echoes. What happens when my reflection tires of merely following? What happens if it decides to lead? That familiar suburban silence shattered the night the attic awoke. This house-sitting tenure, a supposed respite from my cramped city existence, was turning strange. Edward and Lorraine, my parents, finally adrift on their long-anticipated Tuscan holiday, had entrusted their quiet home to me. At 25, the age of illicit house parties felt comfortably distant. Their faith was absolute. I anticipated tranquility, a week steeped in the borrowed calm of their lives. The initial days unfolded as promised. Remote work occupied Dad's leather-chaired study. Mom's pantry offered culinary solace, and the hushed rhythm of the neighborhood was a balm. Then the third night arrived, and the stillness fractured. Deep into a streaming series, a muffled impact resonated from directly overhead. A heavy object meeting floorboards, old timbers settling perhaps. The house, a child of the 60s, possessed a repertoire of groans, but the sound repeated, sharper this time, pursued by the unmistakable cadence of footsteps, measured, deliberate, crossing the expanse above. My pulse surged, a frantic drum against my ribs. The attic. Throughout my upbringing, its entrance remained a forbidden territory, perpetually locked. Edward's dismissive explanation involved precarious footing and accumulated detritus. Yet, undeniably, something stirred within its confines now. I silenced the television, straining into the sudden quiet. The pacing continued, slow, purposeful, traversing the length of the upper space before abruptly ceasing. Silence flooded back, thick and unnerving. I remained frozen on the sofa, ears aching for another sign, until sheer exhaustion blurred the edges of fear, pulling me into a restless sleep. Morning light did little to dispel the clinging unease. A dream, I rationalized, conjured by shadows and suggestion, or maybe the wind or some errant creature nesting in the eaves. Ascending the stairs towards the shower's promise of normalcy, my gaze snagged on the impossible. The attic hatchway, inviolate in memory, hung slightly ajar, a sliver of profound darkness breathing stale air downwards. I stood rooted at the foot of the narrow stairs, staring up at that negligent gap. Every nerve screamed retreat, close it, secure it, erase the memory. But curiosity, that insidious human compulsion, coiled tighter. A ragged breath, and I began the ascent. Each riser groaned beneath my weight, the sound amplified unnaturally in the waiting stillness. Reaching the landing, I hesitated only a heartbeat before pushing the door wide. Dimness reigned, pierced by a single high circular window at the far end. Dust motes pirouetted in the slanted sunbeam, investing the space with an almost sacred air. At first glance, it matched Edward's description, a repository for the obsolete, crammed with shrouded furniture and stacked cartons. But as my vision adjusted, a discrepancy emerged. In the room's center, directly beneath the window's illumination, the thick carpet of dust was disturbed. Footprints, starkly defined, and decidedly not those of a raccoon. They were human. Heart hammering against my sternum, I ventured deeper. The prints tracked towards a cluster of boxes huddled in a corner. Drawing closer, I saw the topmost carton bore signs of recent violation. Packing tape crudely torn, flaps carelessly refolded. Trembling fingers lifted the lid. Inside lay photo albums, scores of them. Yet these weren't the familiar chronicles of my own life, the faded Kodachrome smiles I knew. These were older, many rendered in stark black and white, populated by strangers. One album drew my hand. Opening it, the first photograph elicited a sharp intake of breath. A young woman, perhaps in her early 20s, stood before this very house. The resemblance was uncanny, startling. My own dark hair, the identical shape of the eyes. Yet her attire, the vintage automobile parked at the curb, anchored the image firmly in the 1950s. I turned the pages, revealing more images of her, accompanied by a man I presumed her husband. They appeared content, faces turned towards the lens, arms entwined. But progressing through the album, a chilling transformation occurred. The woman's smile grew taut, strained. Her eyes acquired a haunted, hunted quality. In the final few snapshots, stark terror emanated from her, her gaze perpetually flicking towards something just beyond the frame. The very last photograph froze the blood in my veins. It depicted the woman standing within this precise attic space, her features a mask of pure dread. One hand reaching towards the camera as if imploring intervention. Elara. The album slipped from my numb grasp. What was this narrative I held? Who was this spectral twin, and why did she mirror me so profoundly? As if summoned by my silent query, a floorboard groaned behind me. I spun, throat constricting. Emerging from behind a towering wardrobe draped in a dust sheet, a figure materialized. It wavered initially, an indistinct shimmer like heat rising from summer asphalt, but then coalesced, solidifying into the form of a man, tall, dressed in the severe tailoring of a bygone era, and smiling. It was not a smile of welcome, but one of predatory possession, of ancient, chilling triumph. I scrambled backwards, colliding with boxes, desperate for distance. The figure advanced, its motion subtly wrong, jerky and unnatural. As it drew nearer, the wall behind it became visible through its form. A phantom, dear God, a ghost. Turning, I fled, tumbling more than running down the narrow attic stairs. The door slammed shut behind me, the sound echoing my panic. I didn't stop until I was outside, fumbling with car keys, the engine roaring to life. Aimless miles unspooled before rational thought resurfaced. The phone call to Italy was fraught, punctuated by their evasions. Eventually, fragments of the truth emerged, pieced together through static and reluctance. The woman in the photographs was Elara, my grandmother, my true grandmother. The woman I'd known as Gran Miriam was her successor. Alara had vanished without a trace in 1956, shortly after my father, Theodore's son, was born. Police inquiries yielded nothing. She was eventually declared deceased. Theodore remarried Miriam a few years later, sealing a pact of silence around Alara's fate, believing they were shielding their son, and later me, from a painful legacy. But their knowledge was incomplete. They couldn't fathom the entity haunting the upper floor, the malevolence that had evidently tormented Alara, and now, inexplicably, focused its attention on me. I couldn't return to that house. The very thought provoked nausea. Instead, I plunged into research, delving into yellowed newspaper archives and dusty county ledgers. Before my grandparents' purchase, the house had belonged to a Silas Thorne. He had died within its walls in 1945. The circumstances murky, officially unresolved. The disparate pieces clicked into a dreadful mosaic. Silas Thorne, anchored to the property by his demise, his spirit festering over decades into something potent and cruel. He had preyed on Alara, perhaps driving her to flight, or worse. And now, decades later, he had sensed my presence. Another woman bearing Alara's bloodline, trespassing in his domain. This terrible awareness offers no clear path. Revealing the full spectral truth to Edward and Lorraine feels impossible. Their rational minds would reject it. Yet the certainty remains. I can never again cross that threshold. A gnawing anxiety persists about their return, sometimes in the deepest hours of the night, within the supposed safety of my own apartment. I fancy I hear footsteps, soft, deliberate treads that belong to no neighbor. Sometimes a fleeting movement registers in my peripheral vision. A tall figure in archaic clothes wearing that ghastly, possessive smile. Self-deception whispers that it's merely imagination, trauma echoing in the mind's quiet corners. But a colder, deeper conviction knows otherwise. Silas Thorne is not confined to that dusty attic. He has latched onto me, a spectral parasite following me into the heart of the city. Escape feels elusive, so I banish the darkness with artificial light, avert my gaze from mirrors after dusk, and offer silent, desperate prayers for a way to exorcise this inherited phantom before he inflicts upon me whatever fate befell Alara 60 years ago. Because now I understand, with chilling finality, some doors are built to remain sealed. Some secrets fester poisonously when unearthed, and sometimes the past doesn't merely cast long shadows. Sometimes it returns, tangible and terrifying, wearing a cruel smile and leaving footprints in the dust of rooms best forgotten. My memory latches onto the first instance. Weeks passed now, when the looking glass in my bedchamber offered up more than just my own reflection. It was late afternoon, that fragile hour when daylight begins to bruise into dusk. I had wandered into the room, paused before the antique mirror, affixed to the plaster, and perceived something poised behind my image. There was no mistaking it. A tall, attenuated silhouette swathed in tenebrous fabric. A swift turn revealed only the familiar emptiness of my room. My dwelling occupies the uppermost floor of a structure whose bones have settled over decades, perhaps even a century or more. Its walls possess a formidable thickness. The corridors beyond my door are constricted, perpetually steeped in a wan light. paint flakes from the stairwell like sunburnt skin. Floorboards articulate every footstep with a weary groan. Within my narrow confines, a single bedroom, a bath, a diminutive kitchen, and a living space pulling double duty for dining. The furniture is utilitarian, aged. Solitude is my most frequent companion, the evenings punctuated by the sibilance of plumbing or the low electric thrum from unseen neighbors. A faint, earthy scent, the ghost of dampness, clings to the hallways. Dust accumulates with unnerving speed. I keep the windows sealed. Their warped frames offer poor defense against drafts and the city's ceaseless murmur. This particular mirror had never before commanded my attention. Acquired for a pittance from some dusty repository of cast-off belongings, it stands roughly chest-high, encased in unadorned wood. It hangs opposite my bed, at eye level, a functional object consulted for morning assessments of countenance or the drape of a shirt. Just another relic amidst the apartment's collection of time-worn things, unremarkable until that evening. That initial sighting, the apparition lurking behind my shoulder, didn't immediately incite panic. A trick of the fading light, I reasoned, the sun's oblique rays refracting oddly through the hallway window, perhaps catching some external movement. Yet the following evening, it reappeared. This time I held my ground, transfixed, scrutinizing the reflection, waiting for the figure to betray some sign of life. It remained utterly still, though its form possessed a sharper definition than before. That same towering, slender presence cloaked in its somber vestment. No face was discernible, merely an outline against the backdrop of my room. A warm, insistent pulse throbbed in my temples. A leaden ache settled deep in my gut. My hands grew cold despite the ambient temperature. And when, for the second time, I spun around, the room behind me was vacant. A frantic search ensued, beneath the bed, within the closet shadows, behind the door, even a cautious peer into the dim hallway. Nothing. Nobody. Yet each subsequent glance into the mirror that night confirmed its presence, an unwavering sentinel in the reflected space. Flipping on the overhead light, a single stark bulb casting harsh shadows did nothing to dispel the illusion. The figure persisted, nor did the focused beam of a small torch aimed directly at the glass cause it to waver. Leaving the room and returning moments later yielded the same result. It manifested only as the day waned, reliably around the same hour, absent during the bright morning or the full light of afternoon. Days bled into one another and a chilling pattern emerged. With each successive evening, the reflected figure occupied a space fractionally nearer to my own image. What began as a presence hovering near the distant doorway had, over several twilights, advanced halfway across the room. A few more dusks, and it stood directly behind me, separated by mere arm's reach. I could discern the cut of its shoulders, the manner in which its dark drapery fell, pooling near the floor. Feet, hands, visage, all remained shrouded, unseen. It never stirred while observed, yet each evening's commencement found it irrevocably closer. I attempted aversion, deliberately turning my gaze from the mirror, but a morbid alloy of curiosity and dread invariably drew my eyes back. Sleep became a fractured, elusive thing. Darkness offered no sanctuary, my thoughts circling obsessively around the silent watcher. Often I'd succumb, flicking the light back on, compelled to check, and there it would be, perpetually behind me. One night, desperation drove me to shroud the mirror with a blanket, securing the fabric with strips of old tape. The following evening, hesitant fingers lifted a corner of the covering as twilight descended. It was still there, closer now, so close the reflected proximity suggested I could feel its breath upon my neck, and perhaps I did. A subtle warmth, an almost imperceptible exhalation against the nape, raising gooseflesh along my skin. My heart hammered, a frantic drumbeat echoing in my ears. I tried to swallow past the sudden constriction in my throat, my mouth arid as dust. "What do you want?" The words emerged hoarse, swallowed by the room's quiet. No reply, no movement, only its static, implacable presence. I shifted sideways, testing its position. The figure mirrored my movement, maintaining its constant distance behind my reflection. Untethered to any specific point in the physical room, bound only to my presence within the glass. One evening became a trial of will. I sequestered myself in the living room, determined to ignore the bedroom mirror, yet the thought of its relentless approach gnawed at me. The apartment's silence felt amplified, charged. A knot tightened in my stomach, refusing to yield. My muscles remained coiled, tense. A film of perspiration slicked my brow. The air tasted stale. Faint, intermittent clicks, like tiny twigs snapping, punctuated the quiet. The old building settling, or something else entirely. Restlessness propelled me, pacing the worn floorboards, glancing at the clock. Eventually, the magnetic pull proved too strong. I rose, walked back into the bedroom, and confronted the glass once more. It was immediate, pressed close behind my reflection. A faint, almost sub-audible vibration hummed in the air. My own mirrored image seemed altered, eyes strained, shoulders hunched defensively. The figure loomed, taller than me by a head at least, its cloak appearing denser, heavier. Still no face, only the profound darkness within its hood. A new sound accompanied its presence. A dry, crackling static reminiscent of brittle parchment flexing or ancient joints yielding. It emanated from behind the glass, yet I felt its resonance deep within my bones. My pulse surged, my breathing grew shallow, rapid. A profound stiffness seized my neck. The fine hairs on my arms bristled. Leaning closer, peering intently into the mirror, I strained to penetrate the cowl's obscurity. Nothing but void. Yet the respiration was undeniable. Slow, deliberate inhalations and exhalations that seemed to mimic my own rhythm, only heavier, ancient. My hand reached out, fingertips brushing the cool, smooth surface of the glass. It felt utterly mundane. No heat, no chill, just room temperature solidity. The figure remained impassive. It made no move to grasp or pull, yet an unmistakable intention radiated from it, a palpable sense of wanting. The subsequent evening prompted a different tactic. I lifted the mirror from its simple nail fastening. With deliberate care, I turned it to face the wall, denying its reflective power. Then, seating myself on the edge of the bed, I waited. The familiar sounds of the building asserted themselves. The distant rumble of traffic, a neighbor's door closing down the hall, the low drone of a refrigerator. An hour crept by. Slowly, heart pounding, I rotated the mirror back. The figure stood behind me again, closer than it had ever been. So near now that tilting my reflected head back would mean resting against its shrouded chest. The edges of its cloak brushed the periphery of my mirrored shoulders. I whirled around. Emptiness, only the vacant room, but the sensation of a presence lingered, an almost physical pressure against my back, as if leaning into something substantial yet unseen. An impulse to destroy it seized me. I hoisted the mirror, slamming it against the sturdy wooden bed frame. The thick glass held. Again, harder, the impact jarring my arms, leaving only a dent in the frame and a scratch upon the wood. The mirror remained intact. My toolbox contained a hammer, but some visceral reluctance stayed my hand. An unshakable unease, a tremor in my fingers, a tightening in my chest. A nonsensical yet potent conviction whispered that shattering the glass might unleash something far worse. I couldn't bring myself to strike again. Over the ensuing nights, I persisted in turning the mirror to the wall before attempting sleep. Yet, even sight unseen, its presence permeated the room. I'd start awake in the dead hours, heart hammering against my ribs, skin clammy with sweat, the strange clicking sound skittering in the darkness. I even relocated the mirror to the living room, hiding it behind the couch, its face pressed against the wall. But dusk always drew me back, shoving the furniture aside, turning the glass, compelled to look. And there it would be, always behind me, always fractionally closer, always breathing its soft, unnerving rhythm. Leaving felt like the only sane option. During daylight hours, I ventured outside, gulping fresh air, staring up at the aged facade of the building. Thoughts of hotels, of imposing on acquaintances, flickered and died. I possess no nearby friends, no family who might comprehend such a tale without questioning my sanity. Explaining the spectral presence in my mirror felt impossible. Besides, funds were scarce. A prolonged hotel stay was out of reach. Defeated, I retreated upstairs, back to the oppressive quiet, seeking another solution. I experimented with a cheap digital camera, positioning it on my dresser to record the mirror. I stood before it at the appointed hour, recording. The playback showed only me, standing solitary, my reflection backed by the empty room. No figure. My phone's camera yielded the same result. Normal photographs devoid of the anomaly. This lack of corroboration offered no comfort, only intensifying the profound sense of isolation. Each evening, I feel its proximity increase. It never vanishes, merely waits. Sometimes a faint dragging sound accompanies its appearance, like heavy cloth whispering against a coarse surface. Glancing into the mirror confirms it, a subtle shift in the cloak's folds around its unseen shoulders. The dry clicks return, sharp as knuckle pops. My pulse quickens, hammering in my throat. Weakness invades my legs, my stomach churns. My fingers tremble uncontrollably. I tried addressing it again. "Can you hear me?" Silence answered. The figure remains mute, holding up a piece of paper bearing the words, "Who are you?" elicited no reaction. Plunging the room into absolute darkness and using only a flashlight proved futile. The figure remained steadfast behind my reflection, solid as ever, even under the direct beam. One night, a distinct warmth bloomed on the back of my neck. Not just breath this time, but the palpable heat of a hand hovering scant inches from my skin, radiating intensity without physical contact. A faint, peculiar odor accompanied it, reminiscent of old wool or damp fabric forgotten in a sealed chest. It provoked a dry cough, made my eyes water. I recoiled instinctively, Looking back, the figure was unchanged, unmoving. The thought of discarding the mirror, perhaps consigning it to the alley dumpster, occurs frequently, but a new fear takes root. What if its removal merely disperses the phenomenon? What if the figure begins appearing in the bathroom medicine cabinet, in the polished gleam of kitchen appliances, in the dark reflection of my window panes at night? The possibility of it spreading untethered seems worse than its current confinement. At least now its domain is known. It never makes contact, never lunges, never reveals a face. Yet its closeness is becoming suffocating, a presence I can almost sense with my eyes shut. Sometimes I stand with my back deliberately turned to the mirror, not needing to look to know it's there. A tingling awareness crawls up my spine, my scalp prickles, my breathing falters, becoming ragged. I cannot fathom what awaits when the final sliver of distance between us dissolves, but each twilight confirms its inexorable advance. It offers no respite. The tension is a permanent resident in my muscles. Exhaustion dogs me, yet true rest remains elusive. My dreams are chaotic tapestries, leaving me disoriented and dizzy upon waking. An evening ago, I interposed a chair, a small wooden thing dragged between myself and the glass. Standing behind it, peering into the mirror, I hoped for some barrier, but the reflection showed the figure standing behind me. The chair, irrelevant, bypassed. Angling myself differently proved equally useless. Wherever I positioned myself, it remained steadfastly behind my image. I've ceased interactions with neighbors. Music and television have fallen silent. Now I exist in the apartment's profound quiet, listening, waiting for dusk, waiting for the inevitable appearance. Occasionally, a phantom whisper seems to brush my ear, but focusing reveals only silence. I resist blinking when I stare into the glass, gripped by an irrational fear of what might occur in that brief moment of darkness. How much closer can it possibly get? Lately, its proximity is such that I perceive, in the reflection, something brushing against the fabric of my shirt, a faint, spectral tug, like fingers idly worrying a loose thread. My shoulders ache with a peculiar heaviness when I stand before it. My knees feel unsteady. My arms tremble. A persistent tightness grips my throat, and the periphery of my vision blurs with strain. Whether this entity intends to emerge from the glass, whether it desires anything specific, whether it is even aware of my terror, or merely some strange echo trapped in silvered depths, I cannot know. I only know its nightly vigil, its relentless encroachment, its quiet respiration, the clicking and shifting just behind my shoulder. It never leaves. It never allows rest. Tonight finds me here once more. The light outside surrenders to shadow. The mirror hangs on the wall, expectant. I know precisely what awaits my gaze. Already I feel the phantom warmth on my neck, the familiar rigidity seizing my limbs, the tension that has become my constant state. The figure is behind me. Its approach cannot be halted. All that remains is to stand here, to watch, to feel its breath growing ever closer, and to wait for whatever comes next. The memory crystallizes around the silence, the specific weight of it past midnight when the house settles into its bones. Every switch downstairs was flicked off save one, the small lamp casting a lonely amber circle beside the armchair. the one upholstered in sapphire velvet, the Victorian piece I'd wrestled into my life only the previous afternoon. I sank into it, testing its embrace, firm, undeniably substantial, the velvet cool and plush beneath my fingertips. And then, as my weight settled, a distinct glacial insistence pressed down on my right shoulder. It tightened, a focused point of cold, like fingers gripping hard. No one was there. My heart gave a violent lurch against my ribs. I sprang up, the sudden movement awkward. My gaze shot to the seat cushion. It remained visibly depressed on one side, holding the phantom shape of an occupant. I scrubbed at my eyes, a futile gesture. Leaning closer, peering into the dimness, I watched the cushion slowly, deliberately, regain its plumpness. Thought failed me. Tiredness, I tried to tell myself, sheer exhaustion. But the tremor tracing my limbs, the frantic pulse in my throat, refused the explanation. I gave the chair a wide berth for the remainder of that night. Only the day before, I'd spied it holding court in the window of a dusty antique emporium across town, a place whose cluttered facade always promised hidden narratives. Stepping inside was like entering a paused moment. The scent of aged wood and brittle paper, the low thrum of some unseen ventilator battling the stillness. The proprietor, an older gentleman with silvered hair and a neatly trimmed beard, offered only a cursory glance. I navigated aisles dense with the ghosts of other lives. Tarnished mirrors reflecting fragmented histories, clocks frozen at forgotten hours. Until it found me, the armchair. Its blue velvet seemed to hoard the light, luminous against the gloom. Intricate scrollwork adorned its dark wood frame, hinting at craftsmanship from a different era. Solid legs, generous armrests. The price tag, while not insignificant, felt attainable. I pictured it anchoring my sparse living room, envisioned evenings spent within its grasp, lost in books. The transaction was made, delivery arranged for that very day. When the delivery crew departed, leaving it positioned near the window, it commanded the room. My house, occupied for only a few months, was still a canvas awaiting character. Bare hardwood floors gleamed faintly, the walls stood stark white. The armchair was an island of rich color and texture. Nothing seemed amiss then. I ran my hand over the velvet, smooth and cool. No peculiar odors, no blemishes marred its surface. Later, before the incident, I'd attempted to read a magazine nestled in its depths. It felt stiff, resistant, but I chalked it up to age. Restless, I'd fetched some water, doused the overhead lights, leaving just that single lamp burning. I'd decided to try the chair again, to acclimate. That was the moment the unseen made itself known, that frigid, disembodied grip clamping onto my shoulder. Sleep offered little refuge. I surfaced repeatedly, heart pounding a frantic rhythm against the silence, ears straining, nothing. Just the usual creaks and sighs of a house settling. Morning light brought a fragile bravado. I stood before the chair, examining it with clinical detachment. I pushed on the cushion, firm, resilient. I pressed my own shoulder into the backrest where the sensation had occurred, seeking a logical source. Nothing. The day unfolded with determined normalcy. Work, a late return, a simple meal, television watched from the safety of the sofa. The armchair sat, sentinel, mute and immobile. The room breathed easily. But nightfall resurrected the unease, the morbid curiosity. Again, the ritual of the single lamp, the hushed expectancy. I stood before it, watching, waiting, Silence. A sigh escaped me. Foolishness. I committed, lowering myself onto the velvet. Instantly, the cold returned, settling onto my shoulder. More definite this time, heavier. I froze. Breath caught. My eyes darted down. Bare fabric. I shifted slightly. The pressure moved in perfect concert, an invisible tether. My pulse became a frantic drumbeat. Up again quickly. This time, the indentation formed on the left side of the cushion. A deeper bowl, undeniably the imprint of weight. I could almost trace the outline. I retreated, wiping damp palms on my trousers. Voiceless, I stared. The chair remained vacant, mocking my perception. To the kitchen then, splashing icy water on my face, trying to ground myself. This couldn't be real. Returning, I ran hands over every inch, probing for hidden springs, wires, anything. Nothing, just wood and velvet. I forced myself to sit again. The pressure materialized almost immediately. Right shoulder, a distinct nudge forward this time, an urging. I shot up, breath coming in ragged gasps. Gripping an armrest, I shook the chair violently. It stood solid, unyielding. A surge of anger mingled with the fear, tightening my chest, making my head ache. I extinguished the lamp and fled to bed. The pattern cemented itself over the ensuing days. I'd return home, studiously ignore the sapphire presence in the corner, yet inevitably the pull to test it, to understand, would win. Each time I sat, the chilling, incorporeal touch found me. Always the same shoulder, always that pressure. Initially a mere weight, it evolved into a more persistent nudge, as if coaxing me to rise, to go somewhere. And always, upon standing, that brief, lingering depression in the cushion. The slow release, as if an unseen companion rose reluctantly behind me. This was no trick of fatigue or shadow. It defied explanation, yet it was undeniably happening. My own living room became territory fraught with tension. I limited my approaches to daylight hours, scrutinizing seams, peering beneath the seat, tapping the carved legs, desperate for a rational fault. Nothing. The antique shop hadn't breathed a word of anything unusual. Just an old Victorian armchair, they'd said. The thought of calling them, of trying to articulate this spectral harassment felt absurd. What could I possibly say? A week bled into the next. The sensation intensified. One evening, defiance hardening within me, I sat and refused to yield. The cold hand pressed down, insistent. I remained rigid, jaw clenched, trying to read through the mounting discomfort, the crawl of goose flesh. The pressure increased, becoming an ache, a palpable force. My heart hammered. I couldn't bear it. I surged to my feet, but the pressure didn't vanish. It lingered, nudging me, steering me around the chair itself, urging me toward the hallway leading deeper into the house. I halted. The push strengthened. Sweat prickled my scalp, slicked my back. The fine hairs on my arms lifted. Compelled, I walked forward. The pressure eased slightly, a seeming approval of my compliance. The hallway terminated near a closet door and an adjacent linen cupboard. The invisible force guided my shoulder subtly, directing me to a corner where an old dust cover lay folded on a small stool. My phone's flashlight beam sliced through the dimness, revealing nothing extraordinary. The moment I stopped near that specific corner, the pressure dissolved completely. I stood there, catching my breath, the echo of the touch still tingling on my skin. I waited. Silence answered. Returning to the living room, I found the armchair looking utterly benign. Touching it felt normal. The following evening, I resolved to cooperate fully. Lights dimmed to the solitary lamp. I took my place in the chair. The familiar chill descended, firm and commanding. I rose, and the unseen guidance resumed, propelling me down the hallway to the same corner. This time, I acted. I began tapping along the wall, the floorboards, mostly solid thuds, until near the baseboard behind the stool, my knuckles met a resonant emptiness. Crouching, I felt the painted wood, smooth, unremarkable, but pressing firmly, a small section of paneling gave way, swinging inward on hidden hinges. A tiny, concealed alcove lay revealed. My heart pounded against my ribs. My mouth was desert dry. Reaching into the darkness, my fingers closed around a small, cool metal box, tarnished with age. A simple latch yielded with a faint click. Inside, nestled in faded cloth, lay a bundle of letters. Reading them there in the dim hallway light with trembling hands felt impossible. I carried the box back to the living room, setting it on the low table. Then, bracing myself, I sat in the armchair. For the first time since that initial night, nothing happened. No pressure, no cold. I glanced at the cushion beneath me. It remained perfectly even. I waited, breathing measuredly, eyes fixed on the rusted box. 10 minutes passed in utter normalcy. The air felt lighter. My own body felt calmer, released. Turning on the main lights dispelled the last of the shadows. I carefully unfolded the first letter. The script was archaic, unsteady, dated decades ago, likely close to the chair's genesis. It spoke elliptically of the house, renovations, certain belongings tucked away. Names surfaced, unfamiliar. They were brief notes, receipts, mundane instructions, fragments of a long past life, seemingly devoid of monetary value or dramatic revelation. Nothing hinted at the supernatural, just the dusty remnants of previous occupants. I closed the box, slid it into a nearby drawer. Over the next nights, I cautiously tested the armchair again and again. The pressure never returned. The cushion never held a phantom impression. It was once more simply a chair. The sapphire velvet glowed richly. The carved frame stood silent. The unsettling quality had evaporated, though a residual wariness lingered in the house after dark. The chair itself radiated neutrality. I even recreated the conditions. The single lamp, the late hour. Still nothing. Time smoothed the edges of the experience. The metal box remained in the drawer, its contents unexamined further. I focused on domesticating the space. A new coffee table arrived. Art found its way onto the walls. Warmer bulbs softened the light. The armchair became my preferred reading spot. Evenings found me there, newspaper rustling, magazine pages turning. The velvet remained soft. The frame occasionally groaned softly when I shifted, a natural complaint of age. Sometimes a flicker of memory. The invisible hand would surface. It had wanted the box found, it seemed. Its discovery had satisfied the lingering intention, dissipating the entity. I kept the story locked inside. Explaining it felt like inviting disbelief, courting labels I didn't want. Life resumed its rhythm. The armchair assimilated, becoming just another piece of furniture, albeit the most striking. The nights grew quiet again. I slept soundly, no longer jolted awake by phantom anxieties. Entering the living room ceased to trigger a spike of adrenaline. The floorboards settled beneath my weight without undue comment. Calm reigned. The origins of the box, the identity of its owner, the reason for its concealment, these remained unanswered questions. Questions I felt no compulsion to pursue. They belonged to the chair's past, not my present. I kept the letters, artifacts of an encounter I couldn't explain but never reread them. Now, when my eyes fall upon the armchair, I see elegant lines, deep blue velvet, intricate carvings. I feel supportive upholstery, solid wood beneath my hands. No glacial touch chills my shoulder. No sinking cushion marks an unseen departure. No spectral force guides my steps. I sit, rest my arms, and absorb the quiet. The house feels ordinary. I lack an explanation, but I find I no longer require one. The disturbance has passed. I can lean back, untroubled. My heart beats steadily. My palms remain dry. The room stays still. The armchair is just an armchair, and that is enough. Last night, the key turned with a gritty reluctance, unlocking the immense shadowed maw of the Lyceum. My battered satchel, heavy with scores, bumped against my leg. A thin beam from my torch sliced the Stygian entryway. Public hours had long bled away, but the proprietor, swayed by my need for seclusion and the offered rent, had entrusted me with passage into this forgotten wing. Solitude was the requirement, a sanctuary from prying ears. The air met me thick and stagnant, redolent of decay and sodden timber. With the corridor lights extinguished, my torch beam danced ahead, painting fleeting circles on the flagstones, each footfall a sharp report swallowed by the cavernous hush. Reaching the grand artery of the building, I located the designated practice chamber, its door protesting with a prolonged metallic groan as I pushed it inward. It felt less like entering a room and more like disturbing a tomb. My vocation is the piano, though my pockets echo more than the concert halls I dream of. Opulent studios remain beyond my grasp, hence this neglected space affordable and vast enough for undistracted immersion. A skeletal stage dominated the room, a few disconsolate chairs huddled in a dusty corner, specters at a long-concluded performance. Grime filmed every surface, dimming the tall windows into cataracted eyes. Centered on the stage rested a grand piano, a hulking silhouette. Depositing my satchel, I extracted a cloth, whisking dust from the bench's surface, its upholstery frayed at the edges, the wood scarred. Trivialities. The instrument beckoned. I lifted the heavy fallboard, revealing teeth yellowed like old bone. Aged, certainly, yet it seemed viable. Tentative pressure on a few keys produced notes of inconsistent force but passable tone. A simple C major scale unfurled beneath my fingers, stiffened by the chamber's pervasive chill. My own breath plumed visibly in the torchlight, slicing across the keys, zipping my jacket tighter, offered scant defense against the lack of heating, either defunct or simply dormant. More scales followed, a ritual to coax warmth into my hands. Initially, concentration held sway. The curve of my wrists, the precise articulation, the velocity and evenness of the ascent and descent. Then, abrupt as thought, and glacial tendril traced the back of my neck. A draft, yet the door was shut fast, the windows sealed by years of neglect. I paused, scanning the room. Dust motes hung suspended, undisturbed in the still air. A shrug, a dismissal. I resumed playing. Minutes later, embarking on a Debussy prelude demanding ethereal lightness in the upper octaves, I struck a high G sharp. Instantly, the temperature plummeted, not gradually, but with the brutal shock of stepping into a meat locker. My forearms seized, fingertips numbed despite the jacket. Again, I twisted, peering into the gloom behind me. Nothing. Perhaps a faulty vent, a crack beneath the doorframe. Rational explanations frayed at the edges of the palpable cold. Attempting the passage once more, my fingers grazed the same sequence of keys. And this time, a distinct sound arose from behind. A faint scuff, the whisper of shoe leather on stone. I froze, whirling around, sweeping the torch beam across the stacked chairs, motionless, dust undisturbed. A ragged exhale escaped me, my heart a frantic drum against my ribs. I turned back to the ivory grin of the keyboard. Play resumed, though focus fractured, snagged on the persistent feeling of wrongness. During the next repetition, a single note, perfectly tuned moments before, soured dissonantly, a sudden, ugly distortion. I lifted my hand. The discordant ring lingered unnaturally before decaying. Pressing the key again yielded a normal tone. I checked the pedals. No resonance issue there. Normalcy restored, I attempted the phrase again. This time, a subtle shift on the bench beside me, an indentation, as if an unseen occupant had settled near. My breath hitched. Left hand reaching blindly, I patted the worn velvet. Nothing but empty space. The sensation vanished as quickly as it had come, leaving only the frantic tattoo of my pulse. A respite seemed prudent. I crossed the stage, retrieving my water bottle. My hand trembled as I drank, the liquid cool against a throat tight with dryness. Pacing the perimeter of the hall became a calming ritual. The walls bore witness to bygone eras. Faded playbills, portraits of performers long silenced, a framed teaching certificate yellowed with age, its glass fractured like a spiderweb. Decades separated those names from mine. After several circuits, the piano drew me back. Practice was paramount. I resolved to barricade my mind against these unsettling intrusions. Launching into a Rachmaninoff etude, a piece demanding volatile dynamics and intricate pedal work, I channeled all awareness into technique, breath control, the geography of the keys. Then, amidst a passage of hushed delicacy, something colder than air brushed my neck. Not a draft. Fingers, ice-cold spectral fingers. My body went rigid, my foot spasmed on the damper pedal, shattering the sustained chord into cacophony. My head snapped around. Emptiness greeted me. A wave of gooseflesh cascaded down my arms. I sprang up, scanning the cavernous space beyond the stage lip. The torch beam carved through darkness, revealing rows of vacant seats draped in dust cloths, heavy velvet curtains sagging like ancient eyelids, the distant gleam of the exit sign. Nothing more. A shaky laugh escaped me. Imagination, surely. Yet the undeniable pockets of intense cold near the piano persisted. Back on the stage, heart still galloping, I forced myself to continue. Perhaps a louder piece, something forceful, would exorcise the lingering dread. I chose a Prokofiev toccata, unleashing a torrent of sound. Midway through, the piano's voice warped again. Pitches sagged fractionally, subtly enough to render the familiar melody alien and clumsy. Slowing, I tested each note with deliberate care. Everything snapped back into tune. Rubbing my temples, I sighed. The instrument clearly needed a technician's hand. And then a whisper, faint as exhaled breath, impossibly close to my ear, indecipherable yet undeniably articulate. My skin crawled. I shot to my feet, backing away from the bench, pacing again, torchlight stabbing into shadows, probing the backstage recesses. Nothing. Switching off the light, I stood enveloped in absolute blackness, save for the faint red glow of the emergency exit lamp. Silence pressed in, broken only by my own ragged breathing. My lungs felt constricted, my head throbbed. My phone, retrieved from my pocket, offered no solace, no signal bars in this stone sarcophagus. The battery showed half full. Departure beckoned, yet the imperative to practice warred with a burgeoning, unnerving curiosity. Something in this resonant silence held me captive. Returning to the piano, I sat, hands poised. A slow, melancholic Sadie piece unfolded, initially uneventful. A measure of calm settled over me. Then the cold descended anew, sharp enough to make my breath visible, stinging my eyes. My fingers grew numb, clumsy, yet I pressed on, driven by a stubborn will. From beneath the stage this time, a low groan resonated through the floorboards. I stopped, pressing my ear against the piano's wooden flank. Silence. Rising, I crept to the stage edge, kneeling. A narrow gap existed between the planks, utter darkness within. Tapping the floor yielded a solid thud, accompanied by a strange, cold draft that made my eyes water. Turning back, I saw it. A single key, high C, depressed silently, held down as if by a gentle, invisible finger. No sound emerged, perhaps merely stuck. Hesitantly, I reached out, touched it. The key sprang back instantly. My legs felt unsteady. Sinking onto the bench, I fought to steady my nerves, fingers hovering. I decided to play that specific note. The moment I pressed the high C, a vortex of frigid air engulfed me. My teeth chattered violently. An immense pressure settled onto my shoulders, heavy as stone. Compelled, I continued pressing keys, weaving a tentative melody, testing each note, anticipating the phenomenon. Deeper into the improvisation, the anxiety began to recede, replaced by a sense of being guided by the music itself. Then the shift occurred. My hands, moving with a volition not entirely my own, departed from the melody I intended. Notes I didn't consciously choose flowed from the instrument. I tried to halt, to regain control, but my fingers danced on, locked in this alien composition. Panic surged. Attempting to lift my hands felt like fighting against an unseen force binding them to the keys, palms slick with sweat. The emerging chords were dissonant, unsettling, yet possessed a strange, internal logic. A burning ache spread through my wrists, strained by the unnatural pressure. Gritting my teeth, I wrenched my hands away with a surge of adrenaline. The music fractured into silence. My arms throbbed, trembling. I leaped up, gasping for air. The oppressive cold had lessened. My wrists felt bruised, my fingers shaky. Pacing the stage again, striving for equilibrium. Flight seemed sensible, yet my satchel remained, and the enigma of the place held me fast. Proof. I needed proof. Extracting my phone, I activated the video camera, propping it on the music stand, angled towards the keyboard and myself. Recording initiated. I began a simple, repetitive arpeggio sequence, a task requiring little thought, allowing me to observe. The phone screen glowed, reflecting my tense form. Within a minute, the familiar chill returned, my breath misting before me. Eyes fixed on the screen, I saw it, a flicker, a transient shadow coalescing behind my shoulder, then vanishing. My heart hammered, but I played on. Suddenly, a recorded note deviated, its pitch bending audibly. On screen, my fingers clearly struck the correct key, yet the sound warped. Adrenaline spiked. I pressed harder, and an entire chord flattened momentarily before snapping back. Just then, the screen flickered violently and died. Blackness. I snatched the phone. The power button was unresponsive. Dead. The battery had been half charged. A curse died on my lips. Setting the useless device aside, I felt a tingling numbness creep up my arms, a dizzying lightness in my head. Another swig of water did little to quell the icy knot forming in my stomach. I stood on the precipice of something vast and incomprehensible. I resolved to pinpoint the cold's origin. Cautiously, I traversed the stage, fingers trailing the damp, musty velvet of the stage curtains. At the rear of the hall stood a small storage closet. Its knob, rusted and stiff, resisted, then yielded with a protesting shriek. An odor of mildewed cardboard billowed out. Inside, crammed amidst battered music stands and broken chairs, a fractured mirror leaned against the wall, reflecting distorted fragments of the torch beam. The air felt heavy, cloying, but not markedly colder, nothing beyond mundane neglect. Closing the door, I returned inevitably to the piano. An irrational magnetism pulled me back to the bench. Despite the visceral fear knotting my insides, the frantic rhythm of my pulse, hands placed on the keys, a few tentative notes testing the silence, waiting. Quietude held for a moment, then a blast of icy air struck my back, locking my shoulders. The black keys felt like chips of frozen obsidian beneath my touch. A sibilant whisper coiled near my left ear. My breathing grew labored. I pressed a chord. The sound vibrated with an unnatural resonance. The piano's massive lid rattled briefly, shifted as if nudged. I continued, constructing a simple tune, heartbeat thundering in my ears. And again, the chords began to morph. Muscles locking, the melody contorting into that unfamiliar, haunting pattern. My eyes fluttered closed. A strange swaying overtook my body, trance-like. Thought clouded, submerged beneath the inexorable flow of sound. I was no longer the player, merely the vessel, yet escape felt impossible. My arms trembled, sweeping across the keyboard as the music surged, swelling in volume far beyond my own effort, resonant and deep, as though phantom hands played alongside mine. Then a voice, quiet yet utterly distinct. It spoke my name, Elias. My heart leaped into my throat. I stopped playing, spinning around so abruptly I nearly tumbled from the bench. Silence, stillness, nothing. Sweat beaded on my forehead as I fought for breath. The hall felt immense, empty, save for the frantic pounding within my own chest. Enough. Standing, I snatched my phone, shoving it into my pocket. Rag-bundled satchel zipped, retreat. I descended the stage steps, locked the groaning door behind me, and navigated the Stygian hallway, casting fearful glances over my shoulder, anticipating pursuit. Nothing stirred. The silence pressed down, heavy as velvet. My mind churned with unanswerable questions, but the imperative was escape. Reaching the great front doors, I fumbled with the key, turned the lock, and burst out onto the street. The city's cold night air was a balm against my fevered skin. My breath hitched, shuddering on the exhale. Yet I know I will go back. An inexplicable compulsion, a resonance struck within that haunted space, calls to me through those disembodied notes. I must return to understand, to communicate perhaps, to discover what entity lingers within the venerable Lyceum. Whether comprehension is possible remains uncertain, but the decision is made. Tomorrow night I will face the silence and the sound again. I will seek evidence. I will confront the presence that seeks voice through the music. My hands tremble at the thought, yet I cannot turn away. I have to know. The first time I glimpsed Havenwood's populace converge upon the moon-drenched square at the stroke of 12, I dismissed it as some archaic local custom. By the third such nocturnal assembly, the chilling certainty settled. I had unearthed something deeply malevolent. This somnolent hamlet, nestled deep in folds of forgotten country, cradled a secret steeped in darkness, and my own burgeoning curiosity was poised to thrust me into its abyssal heart. My name is Elias. Scarce 8 weeks had passed since I'd transplanted myself to Havenwood, assuming the mantle of the town's newly appointed community aid worker. Fresh from the halls of academia, brimming with idealistic fervor to mend unseen fractures in the social fabric, I'd envisioned this secluded enclave as the perfect crucible for my nascent career. How profoundly mistaken I was. I had walked willingly into a waking nightmare. Havenwood, on its surface, was aggressively picturesque. Elegant spire-topped houses flanked cobbled lanes. Riotous blossoms cascaded from every sill, and greetings were offered with unwavering smiles. Yet something hollow resided within those smiles, a warmth that never quite ignited the eyes behind them. This dissonance first truly registered with Mrs. Gable, a frail matriarch I was assisting with home support applications. As she spun tales of distant grandchildren, her smile remained steadfast, an unnerving constant even as she recounted the passing of her husband. Her features seemed sculpted into a permanent tableau of agreeability. Later, within the confines of the Greasy Spoon Diner, the unease solidified. 2 locals, heads bent low, exchanged sharp whispers until my presence registered. Instantly, their conversation veered towards innocuous meteorology, those same unsettlingly fixed grins snapping into place like masks. But it was the midnight congregations that shattered my complacency, an accidental discovery, born of late nights wrestling with case files. Figures emerged from shadowed doorways, young and old alike, moving with silent purpose toward the town square. Compelled by a morbid fascination, I shadowed them, keeping to the deeper darkness. What unfolded beneath the indifferent moon froze the marrow in my bones. The entire town, it seemed, stood assembled, forming a silent ring around the ancient, moss-licked fountain. A low, guttural drone pulsed from their throats, a liturgical chant in a tongue utterly alien to me. At the circle's nexus stood Magistrate Thorne, clutching a volume bound in what looked disturbingly like weathered skin. I shrank behind the rough bark of an oak, my pulse hammering against my ribs. This felt ripped from the pages of some gothic horror, too grotesque for reality. Yet, as I watched, Thorne elevated a ceremonial dagger, its obsidian blade catching the lunar luminescence. A young woman glided forward from the crowd, extending her upturned palm. The blade descended in a swift arc. Crimson droplets, stark against pale flesh, fell, staining the fountain's stagnant water. A gasp must have escaped my lips, or perhaps a twig snapped underfoot, for in an instant every head swiveled, a sea of eyes, faintly phosphorescent in the gloom, pinning me to my hiding place. I fled, legs churning, breath tearing at my throat, not daring to pause until the flimsy security of my apartment door was bolted, the curtains drawn tight against the night. Dawn painted Havenwood in hues of normalcy. Residents ambled, errands were run, smiles and waves exchanged, as if the preceding night were nothing but a shared, forgotten dream. But now I perceived the insidious flaws, the unnerving perfection of the lawns, the inhabitants' movements possessed of an almost clockwork uniformity, the utter absence of crime or even minor dissent in a community this size. I desperately tried to rationalize, to attribute the vision to stress, to sleeplessness, to hallucination. Yet a cold certainty resided deep within. The ritual, the blood, the eyes, they were real. My inquiries began subtly, tentatively. I immersed myself in brittle newspaper archives housed in the dusty town hall basement, searching for anomalies, for cracks in Havenwood's placid history. The findings were deeply unsettling. Cyclical patterns emerged. Every few decades, a cluster of disappearances. Tourists who wandered off trails, itinerant workers seeking temporary lodging, new arrivals who abruptly vanished, leaving no forwarding address, no trace. The deeper my excavation, the more monstrous the emerging portrait. Havenwood, it transpired, owed its genesis to an esoteric cult in the 19th century, adherents to a creed demanding the sacrifice of outsiders to secure prosperity and unnatural longevity for the faithful. Through generations of insularity and chilling resolve, they had preserved their blood rights, hidden from the oblivious world beyond. Action was imperative. This darkness needed exposure, but trust was a shattered commodity. The chief of police had stood within that chanting circle, as had my own supervisor at the community services office. It was conceivable, horrifyingly probable, that every soul in Havenwood was complicit. My strategy shifted to evidence gathering. A miniature camera, procured discreetly from an online retailer, became my constant companion. I documented the fleeting moments when practiced facades slipped, revealing something cold and alien beneath. The cryptic sigils etched into the foundations of colonial-era buildings, the unsettling chants captured from a safe distance whose playback sent spiders of ice crawling up my spine. Weeks bled into a month, paranoia becoming my unwelcome shadow. Eyes seemed to track my every move. Mrs. Gable initiated an accidental collision at the grocer's, her bony fingers lingering unnervingly on my forearm during the apology. My apartment door, I discovered one afternoon, stood unlocked, though my memory insisted I had secured the deadbolt. Then the overt warnings commenced. A desiccated sparrow laid carefully on my doormat, a slip of paper in my mailbox bearing the stark ultimatum, leave or join us. The insidious discovery that my car's brake lines had been expertly severed. Escape became the only imperative, my compiled evidence a potential lifeline to the outside authorities. Yet each attempt was mysteriously sabotaged. My aging sedan would inexplicably sputter and die miles from anywhere. A sudden violent squall would render the only road out impassable. On one terrifying occasion, I drove for hours, convinced I was heading west, only to find myself looping inexplicably back towards the familiar, dreadful spire of Havenwood's town hall. The culmination arrived under the spectral glow of the harvest moon. My escape plan was finalized, meager belongings packed and concealed within my closet, when a sharp rap echoed against my apartment door. Opening it revealed Magistrate Thorne, flanked by several stony-faced town elders. "Elias," he intoned, his voice a silken trap, his eyes devoid of any warmth. "We find ourselves in need of a conversation." They entered without invitation, their presence instantly shrinking the small space, and a chilling certainty washed over me. They knew. "You've demonstrated considerable curiosity regarding our modest community," Thorne began, settling into my armchair with an air of proprietary ownership. "Curiosity is valued, Elias. It brings vital new perspectives, new blood, one might say, to Havenwood. But unchecked, it curdles into a liability." I held my ground, striving for a steadiness I did not feel. "I know what you do, the rituals, the sacrifices, it's all documented. If I disappear, everything goes straight to federal investigators." Thorne's smile remained fixed, yet the air grew palpably colder. "Ah, Elias, your naivete is almost poignant. This tradition spans centuries. Do you truly imagine yourself the first to perceive the truth and attempt exposure?" He made a subtle gesture. One of the elders produced a familiar leather-bound object. My blood turned to ice as I recognized my own meticulous journal. "Your diligence is commendable," Thorne murmured, idly flipping through the pages filled with my terrified observations. "Truly impressive. In a different circumstance, you might have proven a valuable addition. As things stand, well, you present us with a rather inconvenient dilemma." Instinctively, I retreated, eyes darting towards the windows, the door, seeking any sliver of escape, but their positioning formed an inescapable cordon. "You see, Elias," Thorne continued, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper, "Havenwood exists in equilibrium. Our fortune, our enduring vitality, demands reciprocity. A willing offering is always preferred. It maintains tidiness. But for disruptive elements such as yourself, exceptions must regretfully be made." As he spoke, a subtle yet horrifying transformation began among the elders. Their skin seemed to shimmer, features subtly elongating, distorting into configurations not entirely human. Their eyes ignited with the same faint, predatory luminescence I'd witnessed in the square. "You are afforded one final courtesy," Thorne declared, rising slowly from the chair. The obsidian knife materialized in his hand, seeming to drink the meager light. "Join us. Willingly embrace the community. Become one with Havenwood in spirit and substance." He paused, letting the unspoken alternative hang heavy in the air. Or, in that terrifying instant, surrounded by beings shedding their human guise, offered a damned salvation by a man whose smile was a death mask. My choice was instinctual. I bolted. The ensuing moments remain a fractured nightmare, a desperate flight through Havenwood's labyrinthine streets, the entire town seemingly animated by a collective, malevolent will. Shadows detached themselves from buildings, whispers echoed from empty doorways. By some miracle of terror-fueled adrenaline, I reached the invisible demarcation, the town limits. As my feet crossed that unseen threshold, an unearthly guttural howl ripped through the night air behind me. A backward glance revealed them, Thorn, the elders, the townsfolk, halted abruptly at Havenwood's edge, a spectral border they could not or would not cross. I ran until the lights of the next town shimmered into view, collapsing onto the steps of the sheriff's office, gasping out my incoherent story. Disbelief was the predictable response. Deputies dispatched to investigate Havenwood reported nothing amiss, only a quaint, quiet village settling down for the night. I never went back. I fled the state, adopted a new identity, attempted to stitch together the fragments of a new existence. But the imprint of Havenwood is indelible, the knowledge of what festers behind its charming facade, a permanent resident in my mind. An entire town of monsters perpetuating their dark covenant, masked by picket fences and neighborly waves. Sometimes when the wind sighs late at night, I fancy I can hear the faint rhythmic drone of chanting, and I wonder how many other Havenwoods lie hidden across the land. How many unsuspecting souls are lured into their webs, their disappearances mere footnotes in dusty archives. My escape feels less like freedom and more like a temporary reprieve. The horror of Havenwood clings to me, a chilling certainty that Magistrate Thorn and his inhuman congregation are out there, patient, watchful, waiting for the moment my vigilance slips. Because once you've glimpsed the monster beneath the mask, neutrality ceases to exist. You are either assimilated or you become the next offering upon their ancient, blood-stained altar. The hum of the ancient fluorescent tubes overhead was the night's usual drone, a sound weaving itself into the fabric of silence at the beacon fuel stop. 2 o'clock bled towards 3, and outside, the highway lay like a ribbon of discarded asphalt under a starless sky. My world, contained within these glass walls and stocked shelves, was typically punctuated only by the turning of pages in whatever worn paperback accompanied my solitude. Then the electronic chime above the entrance, sharp and sudden, sliced through the quiet. It announced arrivals who, though I couldn't know it then, were harbingers of a night that would unravel the predictable threads of my existence. 6 months I'd spent marooned on this graveyard shift, a necessary exile trading sleep for solvency, the quiet hours a fertile ground for drifting thoughts and cheap fiction. The patrons were few, spectral figures emerging from the dark, truckers chasing caffeine ghosts down endless roads, the occasional disoriented traveler seeking a landmark on a forgotten map. Tonight, initially, promised no deviation from this sparse script. From the worn spine of my novel, I looked up. 4 figures materialized under the stark lighting. 3 men, 1 woman. Not the familiar silhouettes of haulers or holidaymakers. A peculiar synchronicity marked their movements as they entered, clad in clothes that seemed to absorb the light rather than reflect it. An invisible current crackled around them, prickling the hairs on my neck. "Evening," I offered, aiming for the practiced neutrality of the night attendant. "Just so you know, the doors lock in about 15. The woman pivoted towards me. A smile ghosted her lips, a fleeting curve that failed to ignite any warmth in her watchful eyes. "Don't trouble yourself over us. We shan't linger unduly." Yet linger they did. They fanned out, dissolving into the narrow aisles lined with candy bars and motor oil. One drifted towards the coolers, another browsed the dusty automotive section. The third simply stood near the magazine rack, unnervingly still. The woman ambled, her path seemingly random. I tracked their reflections in the convex security mirrors, fragmented glimpses that only amplified my disquiet. They weren't shopping, not really. Hands brushed over merchandise, items lifted and replaced without scrutiny. Fragments of whispers exchanged just beyond the threshold of hearing. Minutes bled away, thick and slow. The clock ticked past 2:15, the designated closing. I cleared my throat, the sound unnaturally loud. Folks, apologies, but we are officially closed. I'll need you to bring your selections to the counter now. The tallest of the men detached himself from the shadows of aisle 3. He approached, his features obscured by the deep shadow cast by the brim of a dark cap. "We find ourselves not quite finished," he murmured, his voice a low rasp like stones grinding together. "Perhaps you could indulge us. Keep the lights on a while longer." Ice water sluiced down my spine. This wasn't petition, it was pronouncement. I'm afraid that's not possible," I stammered, the words catching. "Company rules. It's my job on the line." He leaned forward across the counter, close enough for me to smell the stale ghost of cigarettes on his breath. "Listen closely," he said, the softness of his tone more menacing than any shout. "We are not leaving. You are not making any calls. Is that understood?" My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat I felt sure he could perceive. I managed a jerky nod, speech utterly failing me. He straightened, a flicker of something unreadable in the darkness beneath the cap's brim. "Excellent. Return to your reading. Act as though we are merely phantoms in your periphery." Phantoms? How could I? These 4 individuals had commandeered my small fluorescent world, their presence a palpable weight, and I, its sole guardian, was utterly adrift. My fingers twitched, hovering near the underside of the counter where the silent alarm waited. But his words echoed. "You are not making any calls." Did they know? Was their observation that acute? The subsequent hours stretched into an eternity measured in buzzing lights and shallow breaths. The quartet continued their strange ballet, drifting through the aisles, occasionally murmuring in low tones, then lapsing into profound shared silences. Now and then, one would materialize at the counter, requesting cigarettes or needing the beer fridge unlocked. Each time I complied, my hands trembling so violently the keys rattled against the lock tumblers. 3 o'clock dissolved into 4. 4 bled towards the gray promise of 5. A question began to scream in my mind. What purpose held them here? This wasn't robbery, not in any recognizable form. The till remained untouched, the safe unmolested. It felt like waiting. An expectant stillness hung in the air. But waiting for what? At some point, as the darkness outside began to thin, the woman approached the counter again. Unlike the men, her gaze met mine directly, unnervingly steady. "Your name?" she inquired, her voice surprisingly melodic. "Silas," I stuttered out. A genuine smile touched her lips this time, transforming her face for a fleeting moment. "Silas," she repeated, testing the shape of it on her tongue. "Tell me, Silas, do you entertain notions of destiny?" I blinked, thrown entirely off balance. I'm not sure. Never gave it much thought, I suppose. She leaned closer, her eyes like polished obsidian seeming to draw me in. Perhaps you should begin. Destiny is the current that brought us to this specific place, on this specific night. Destiny is why you are here, Silas, tending this lonely beacon when you might have been anywhere else. A profound chill, deeper than before, settled into my bones. What are you saying? But she merely offered that enigmatic smile again and turned, melting back towards her companions, leaving me floundering in a sea of confusion and burgeoning terror. Just as the first tentative fingers of dawn painted the eastern horizon, the distant growl of an engine solidified into an approaching vehicle. Hope surged. A delivery truck? A state trooper on patrol? The hope fractured as a large obsidian black SUV with windows like mirrored voids pulled smoothly up to the pumps. A man in an impeccably tailored suit emerged. He entered the store with an air of absolute ownership, acknowledging the four silent figures with the slight inclination of his head. "Is it time?" asked the tall man, Jonas. The newcomer nodded curtly. "It is time. Your vigil is concluded." And just like that, a silent command given and received, they began to file towards the door. Serafina paused at the threshold, turning back to fix me with that penetrating gaze one last time. "Remember our conversation, Silas, about destiny tonight. This is merely the overture." Then she was gone, swallowed by the tinted windows of the SUV, which pulled away with silent efficiency, leaving behind only the scent of exhaust and bewildered silence. I stood motionless, anchored to the linoleum, the hum of the coolers suddenly deafening. Minutes passed. When I finally forced my gaze to the clock, it registered 6 a.m., my shift's end. As if summoned by the hour, Manny, my relief, pushed through the door. He took in my pallor, the tremor in my hands, his brow furrowing. "Rough one, Silas?" My mouth opened, a torrent of unbelievable events poised to spill out. Then it snapped shut. Who would possibly credit such a tale? And what precisely had occurred? No theft, no violence, just them. Just the waiting and the words. "Yeah," I finally managed, the word tasting like ash. "Rough one." Collecting my book and jacket, I stepped out into the nascent daylight, my mind a chaotic storm. Driving home, Serafina's words resonated like a struck bell. Destiny, overture. What did it signify? In the weeks that followed, I obsessively scanned news feeds, local reports, searching for any ripple, any crime, any oddity that might connect to that night. Nothing. The world spun on, oblivious. But I wasn't oblivious. I knew. It was etched into my marrow, manifesting in the nervous start at every chime of the door, the compulsive scrutiny of each face that crossed the threshold. Exactly 1 month to the day after their visitation, I arrived for my shift to find a plain white envelope tucked beneath my usual stack of paperwork. Inside, a single sheet held an unfamiliar address and a time. Beneath it, 5 words froze the blood in my veins. "The next movement begins now." I stared at the stark black ink, my thoughts racing, colliding. A primal urge screamed at me to burn it, to flee, to reclaim the mundane safety I hadn't appreciated until it was gone. Yet a stronger, more inexplicable compulsion stayed my hand. Whatever strange machinery had engaged that night at the Beacon fuel stop, it hadn't finished with me. For reasons utterly beyond my comprehension, I was entangled in its gears. Pocketing the note, its crisp edges sharp against my thigh, I began the familiar rituals of the night shift. The fluorescent lights hummed their ceaseless song, but the world they illuminated was irrevocably altered. The comfortable landscape of late-night boredom and borrowed narratives had receded. Ahead lay, what? Peril, revelation, fate. I possessed no map, no answers, but recalling Seraphina's intense gaze, her pronouncements on destiny, a chilling certainty settled within me. I was going to find out. For better or worse, the ordinary life of Silas was over. An extraordinary, terrifying one was dawning. It wasn't until their eyes caught the torchlight, flat, glacial, utterly barren of soul, that the awful truth detonated within me. These smiling faces, these simple folk, a masquerade, and I, ensnared in their web of a village, was utterly cut off. Europe had unfolded before me like a vibrant tapestry, 3 months snatched between university's end and the looming monolith of a career. Cities pulsed, Rome's ancient heart, Paris's electric veins, Berlin's defiant rhythm. Glorious, yes, but exhausting. The crowds, the polished tourist trails, a hunger gnawed within me for something unvarnished, something real. In a smoke-wreathed Prague cavarna, amidst the clatter of porcelain, they found me. Bodan and Zofia, creased leather faces, smiles that seemed etched by sun and wind. Their voices, low and musical, painted visions of their ancestral hamlet nestled deep in Bohemia's folds, a place bypassed by time's relentless march, rolling hills cradling timbered houses, a life lived by the seasons, not the clock. Few outsiders find us, Zofia murmured, her gaze holding an odd intensity. A true taste of the old country, you understand? It resonated with my craving, a siren song of authenticity. When Bodan offered passage in their rattling automobile, doubt was a forgotten language. Hours bled into one another as the city's grasp loosened, then fell away entirely. Asphalt surrendered to rutted tracks, civilization thinning to skeletal forests and vast, sighing fields. My phone screen went dark, a digital umbilical cord severed. No matter, I was adrift on anticipation. Bodan steered, Zofia spun tales, legends of the village, its founding, its peculiar celebrations. Their words wove a tapestry of belonging, a fierce, almost possessive love for their isolated world that only amplified my own eagerness. Twilight painted the sky in bruised purples and fading golds as we crested a final hill. Below lay the village, precisely as conjured, cottages clustered like sleeping animals under crimson-tiled shells, a stoic stone church spire piercing the gloaming, the scent of hearth fires a tangible comfort. Chickens scattered from our path. Bodan and Zofia presented me to figures emerging from doorways. Their greetings murmured, their smiles wide. I was ushered into the sole pension, a timber-framed relic seemingly plucked from a brother's grim illustration. That evening, the village tavern pulsed with warmth and amber light. Bodan and Zofia flanked me at a rough-hewn table. Robust stew, dark, potent beer, the boisterous thrum of local life. It intoxicated me. Faces turned towards our corner, drawn by the novelty of an American accent. Questions flowed, friendly inquiries about my journey, my distant home. I basked in the attention, a fleeting star in their sequestered firmament. Buoyed by ale and camaraderie, I readily agreed to extend my stay. Days, perhaps. Why rush from such genuine hospitality? Sunlight streamed through leaded glass the next morning, promising another idyllic day. I wandered cobbled lanes, exchanged pleasantries, even lent a hand mending a fence. The welcome held, effusive, almost suffocatingly attentive. Yet hairline cracks began appearing in the facade. Conversations hushed as I drew near, melting away like mist. Eyes flickered towards each other in silent communion. And the smiles. Ah, the smiles. They remained fixed, sculpted things that left the eyes untouched. Vacant. Paranoia, I chided myself. The stranger's unease in a tight-knit community. Nothing more. Night fell and the village square ignited. Fiddles wept, accordions wheezed, boots stamped the earth. More beer, potent and disorienting. I surrendered to the swirling energy, the unease momentarily drowned. But the hour grew late. My phantom schedule beckoned. Leaving so soon, Bodan materialized beside me, his smile unwavering. But the night is young. You belong here now. I offered a polite deflection, spoke of needing rest, of plans elsewhere. Then I saw it, just for a heartbeat, beneath the bonhomie, a flicker of something predatory and possessive in his gaze. It vanished, replaced by practiced warmth, but the icy touch lingered on my soul. "We insist," he murmured, his grip closing on my forearm, unexpectedly strong. "There is much yet you must see." My gaze swept the perimeter. The dancing hadn't stopped, but heads were turned. A ring of faces, all smiling, but their eyes, gods, their eyes, fixed on me. Not curious now, but watchful, appraising. A collective silent hunger that turned my marrow to slush. Muttering a panicked excuse, I wrenched free and fled to the pension. The thump of my own heart, a frantic drum against my ribs. Escape, now. Dawn brought resolve, swiftly shattered. The single track leading from the village was impassable. A recent landslide, they claimed, gesturing vaguely towards the forested slopes. A day, perhaps two, Bodan assured me, his expression radiating helpful concern. Why such haste? Are we not gracious hosts? Days blurred into a suffocating cycle of thwarted hope. Every path seemed to watch me. My phone remained a useless brick. Public phones were non-existent or perpetually out of order, and they were everywhere, always nearby, observing with those placid, unreadable faces, those smiles like painted masks. I feigned contentment, walked the tightrope of polite conversation, all while desperately scanning for an unseen exit. But the air grew thick with unspoken knowledge. They saw my desperation. The charade was fraying, revealing something cold and patient beneath. The fifth night brought another gathering, but this was no celebration. It felt ancient, ritualistic. Crude masks obscured faces, transforming neighbors into unnerving effigies. A guttural chant rose and fell, weaving through the torchlight in syllables utterly alien. Hidden in the pension's shadows, I watched, ice water flooding my veins. This was it, now or never. When the chanting reached a fever pitch, I stole out the rear door, melting into the deeper darkness beyond the village perimeter, towards the forest. My only prayer. A strangled cry pierced the night. Discovered, I bolted, the forest embracing me with thorny arms. Branches tore at my skin, my clothes. Behind, the sounds shifted. The chanting warped into something feral, punctuated by yelps and ululations that scraped at the edges of human. They poured into the woods, a relentless tide. Twigs snapped, leaves rustled, their eerie calls echoing through the trees. Closer, always closer. My lungs were fire, my legs screaming anchors. Just as despair threatened to swallow me whole, a glimmer through the trees, twin beams of light, a road. I erupted from the undergrowth, a ragged silhouette staggering into the glare, arms flailing like a madman's. Tires shrieked. A car shuddered to a stop. I clawed at the passenger window. God, please, help! They're right behind me. An elderly driver, face pale in the dashboard glow, took in my terror-stricken eyes, my shredded state. The lock clicked. I tumbled inside as the first masked figures broke from the tree line, their forms stark against the distant village lights. We surged forward, engine roaring. In the rear-view mirror, they stood motionless at the forest's edge, a silent, watching congregation. And even across the receding distance, I swear, I saw the pinprick gleam of their eyes. What purpose drove them? What ancient hunger lay behind those welcoming facades? I never learned. Perhaps it's better not to know. The authorities listened with polite skepticism, a frantic, incoherent tale from a traumatized tourist. Yes, they located the hamlet, nestled deep in its valley, deserted, dust motes dancing in vacant cottages, the ancient church silent save for the wind. No trace of Bowden, Zofia, or any soul. Utterly empty. Sometimes sanity flickers. Did I conjure it all? A fever dream born of exhaustion and isolation? But then, on a crowded street or across a quiet cafe, I'll see them. A couple, elderly faces mapped by time, offering a benign smile. And for a chilling instant, their eyes will meet mine, reflecting that same flat, abyssal emptiness. The memory floods back, cold and sharp. The deadliest traps are often camouflaged with kindness. True darkness can wear the most cordial mask. Some forgotten corners of the world are meant to remain forgotten. My wanderlust has withered. The globe feels constricted now, shadowed. Yet, late at night, drawn by a morbid curiosity, I trace forgotten roads on old maps of Bohemia, seeking coordinates for a phantom village, forever plagued by the chilling whisper. What fate awaited me had I lingered just one more dawn?